talking about cosmetics. Several of you are asking about cosmetics. I really recommend, I mentioned this website last week called EWG.org, Environmental Working Group, and they classify different. Now we do have on our website, Alan, if we could put that up on the screen, if you go to our shop and then go to our lifestyle section, there are some different companies there that we recommend for natural lotions, creams, and other kind of hygiene-based products where you're getting a minimal exposure or no exposure to heavy, harsh chemicals. Okay, we got a question coming in. Had a full hysterectomy last week. The doctor has already given me estrogen patches. The side effects from them are horrible, and I'm wondering, should I stop taking or just see how the body reacts? Well, I can't answer that question. I can't give actual direct medical advice here, but I would definitely have a conversation with that doctor. You might even seek out, if that doctor is unwilling, you might seek out a doctor who's willing to look at, instead of giving you a synthetic horse-derived estrogen, you might ask them about bioidentical forms of estrogen, because many women that have had a full hysterectomy don't do well on the horse-derived steroids. They do much, much better on bioidentical forms of estrogen. So it's definitely a conversation I would have with them, especially if you're reacting that poorly to the synthetics. And I would say that on that note, any of you who are facing a hysterectomy, very, very important before you pull the trigger, because once you do a full hysterectomy, it's over. You can't get your ovaries back, right? So before you were to pull a trigger on that, you really want to think about this, because for a lot of women that I have seen come to see me for nutritional guidance over the years, a lot of times just making diet and lifestyle changes regulates it out, and they don't need the surgery. So again, before, never look at surgery as your first option. Never look at just synthetic hormones as your first and surgery as your second option. You understand how powerful this message is today, because if you apply it, there's a strong likelihood that you'll find a great improvement in your outcome. So keep that in mind. Oh, okay. Jennifer's saying, what does spotting after menopause mean? Have had a lot of it after being on paleo AIP for several months. So there's something called, it's a great question. There's something, well, I call it this. I don't know what other people call it, but this is what I call it. And that I call it, oh, that's a terrible color. Let's get a darker one. Pseudo menopause, meaning that a lot of women think they go through menopause when they don't. And part of the reason they think they're going through menopause is because time leads to such a disruption of this hormonal cascade that they're experiencing hot flashes. They're experiencing what they think is menopause, when actually, in actuality, what they're experiencing is estrogen dominance, not menopause at all. So they have hot flashes, they have trouble sleeping, they have increased anxiety, they have water retention, they have fat gain. Like, all that can happen as a result of that estrogen dominance. Now, when you change your diet and your lifestyle, so if you go like to a no grain, no pain type of diet, those of you who haven't read No Grain, No Pain, make sure you go get your copy, because that diet is a big part of what I'm talking about. But what will actually happen is you start spotting again, and I've actually seen some women regain their period, like they started having their cycle again for several years. They weren't in menopause, they were in pseudomenopause, because their behavior and their lifestyle was leading to hormone disruption that created an estrogen dominance that led to a fake, if you will, or a pseudo type menopause. So it's very possible that you're changing your diet for a few months is leading to a natural re-regulation of your hormones, and that's what you're experiencing. And again, you may, and we can't predict the future, but I've seen many women regain their cycle after changing their diet for several months. So that's not out of the question. That can happen. What's my opinion on bioidentical hormone therapy versus synthetic hormones? Always start, if you need hormone therapy, this is a conversation you definitely want to have with the prescribing doctor, but if you need hormone therapy, my opinion on it is I would always opt for a bioidentical over a non-bioidentical. And here's one of the reasons why. A lot of research shows, and actually Daphne Rowe, who's a researcher on drug-induced nutritional deficiencies, this is where this comes from. This is a doctor who has been studying the effect on medications and nutrients, vitamins. Understand that estrogen, we're talking about estrogen, prescription estrogen, causing a deficiency of magnesium, vitamin B6, zinc, vitamin B2, for starters. So again, if taking estrogen, prescription-based estrogen, can cause disruption in these nutrients, then what happens when these nutrients are disrupted? Magnesium is responsible for more than 300 chemical reactions in the body, so blocking it or disrupting it is a very bad idea. And if you don't know that, then you don't know to monitor it. Your doctor doesn't know that. Your doctor won't know to monitor it. So you want to definitely understand this so that it can be monitored, because if you're going to be on any, whether it's bioidentical or whether it's synthetic, you should understand that estrogen does that when taking it in physiological doses that isn't being produced by your body. So I'd say my opinion is bioidentical over synthetic, because they will work better for your body, in your body. But again, it's also been my experience that some people do better on synthetic than they do on bioidentical. So everybody's going to be different here. I would say before you even entertain either one, is understand this well and apply diet and lifestyle, because you may not need either one. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Amber says, on what day of antibiotics should you start your broad spectrum probiotic? If you were going to start a broad spectrum probiotic, the one I recommend is Ultrabiotic Defense, especially if you've been on an antibiotic or on an antibiotic, because of the dosing. You want mega dosing, you don't want small dosing. So hundreds of billions of colony-forming units of Bifido and Lactobacillus is more ideal if you're on an antibiotic. And you start it right away. You start it while you're on the antibiotic. Don't wait. You just don't want to take them concomitantly. So like you wouldn't take your antibiotic and then take your probiotic. You would want to separate them out, at least ideally about 3 to 4 hours apart from each other, so that you're not just taking that antibiotic and then taking the probiotic and just killing the probiotic with the antibiotic. So give them a 3 to 4 hour lag time between the two. And so I don't recommend waiting. I recommend taking them at the same time concomitantly. Question from Denise: can a fever or sweating ever be a symptom of being glutened? Yes, it can. Gluten exposure, being glutened, right, can actually emulate a fever. It can emulate an infection. Okay. So the question keeps coming back to that antibiotic / probiotic. There's no danger in taking them at the same time. Like you're not going to disrupt the antibiotic's effect, and you're not going to, if anything, the antibiotic is going to disrupt the probiotic, but what you're doing is you're taking them on the same day, mainly because you don't want to just take an antibiotic for 10 days, let's say it's a course of antibiotics for 10 days, and do nothing for your gut. You want to put as much healthy flora in there as possible, because remember, the number one side effect of taking a prolonged antibiotic is a yeast overgrowth. So by taking that strong probiotic with it, you very much can reduce or minimize your risk of developing a yeast overgrowth. So this question, Angel says, niacinamide, garlic, resveratrol for cholesterol. Brought mine down 50 points, 6 pats to go, and doctor wants me on cholesterol meds. Define 6 pats. That sounds like British to me. So Angel, define 6 pats. But I think the bigger question isn't what you should do to lower your cholesterol. I think the bigger question is what is actually considered to be healthy cholesterol versus unhealthy cholesterol. Remember, most doctors are going to want it under 200. Now, is that the right move? No. Even if you're taking things that naturally bring it down, like red yeast rice, or you could take niacin, you can take high-dose fish oils, and those will all kind of bring it down to a certain extent. The question isn't, let's get it down lower. The question is, why do we want it lower? What is the actual premise of lowering cholesterol? And if you haven't seen some of my information on the cholesterol myth, type that in. Go to glutenfreesociety.org, type in the cholesterol myth, and pull up those videos and that information. Learn more about cholesterol, because you may be thinking, I need to lower my cholesterol, and I'm doing it natural, therefore it's safer and it's better. But in reality, you may not even need to be worried so much about cholesterol. That really is the takeaway. Remember, you lower your cholesterol, you increase your risk for depression, but even greater, neuronal synapses, bile acids, vitamin D, CoQ10, those things become inhibited, those things don't work as well, and now you end up struggling as a result of those consequences. Nancy, if you have a fibroma and you're being faced with certain decisions with medication, the best thing you can do, look, I would encourage any of you who are looking at one of these medical decisions, it's very alarming and it's very concerning to you, is if your traditional conventional doctor is telling you surgery medicine is the solution, understand this. From a fundamental practical perspective, no amount of hormone dysregulation was ever caused as a result of being deficient in surgery or being deficient in a drug, a medication. So the fundamental question is not what you can do to artificially mask or artificially manipulate your hormone. The question is, why is the hormone abnormal in the first place? That's the question that needs to be asked. Now, many of you are struggling because maybe your doctor's not having that conversation with you. This is where I would highly encourage you to work with a functional medicine doctor, because you're going to get more information. If your philosophy is more of a diet, lifestyle, natural, you're going to get more information that matches what you want to do, as opposed to being told you need drugs and surgery. Okay. Going through these questions. Yeah, I like this comment. Linda says, listening to the horrors of others post-hysterectomy changed my mind. Again, this isn't a place where we're judging anybody whether you've had it or you haven't had it, but we just, if you're in that decision and you're facing that, you definitely want to know all your options and get educated. So if chemo popped you into menopause, yes, you could still have pseudomenopause. That is a potential possibility. I've seen women go through that and bounce back from it, but it largely depends on what they're doing to try to bounce back from it. Sometimes these things really need to be dialed in. They really need to be measured. You need therapeutic doses of nutrients to really get to overcome that type of chemo based damage. So Huda's asking, is cholesterol of 110 too low? As I said, anything under 150 is in my opinion, is too low. Okay, let's see here. Corey says, great video. Do you do any or have any videos on SNPs? I actually used to do a radio show on genetic single nucleotide polymorphisms, Corey. I don't know if you can go find that in the archive. I don't even know if we have that up in the archive, but I've done several radio shows on genetics and the single nucleotide polymorphisms. If not, we can do another one in the future. As a matter of fact, those of you who'd like to see me talk about genetic SNPs or genetics, just go ahead and type in yes please in your box, and if I get 100 people that type that in, then I'll do a show on it and focus in on that for you guys. Okay. Gosh, we got all kinds of questions. A lot of them aren't related. I'm going to try to keep to related questions. If the gallbladder is inflamed, what could be the cause? In my experience, most people, when there's an inflamed gallbladder, it's an overright toxicity, and that can come from a number of different things: eating bad food, eating processed food, being overexposed to chemicals like heavy metals, but also gluten. Gluten is a very, very big trigger for gallbladder inflammation. Okay, this is a good question. Dana says, but aren't you low on hormones if you're pre-menopause or in menopause? I've had my levels checked by my environmental doctor. Yeah, I mean, there's a natural progression for hormones to drop as you do hit certain age points. Your body doesn't need to, you know, the whole premise of menopause is that your body is actually protecting you by not allowing you to have more children. And so those eggs, remember, women are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have. And you know, those eggs have a shelf life. And so menopause is the body's natural way of reducing the hormone output so a woman won't get pregnant. Because, you know, as we know, the older a woman is above the age of 35, the greater potential there is for birth defects and abnormal birth problems. So again, yeah, there's a natural decline in hormones in women. And so again, some women take, here's the thing, some women take hormones because it's a quality of life issue. Their quality of life, their hot flashes, their irritability, their severe mood swings, their symptoms are so great and it's disrupting their life to such a great degree that they opt to take bioidentical hormones, or they opt to take, you know, estrogen or progesterone or other hormones as a quality of life choice. Now, as long as you're aware of what the risks can possibly be, you know, and you're making an intelligent choice and you're aware of the risks, that's what we call informed consent. You're being informed of what those potential risks are, and you're saying that, yes, the way that my life is now isn't, it would be better if I weren't having these symptoms, so I opt to accept those risks because the symptoms are so great that I'm not enjoying life. And so that's what some women opt to do. There's nothing wrong in doing that, although if you're on bioidentical hormones and you're trying to bring your levels up to, let's say you're 50 and you're trying to bring your levels up to that of a 30-year-old woman, then you definitely need to be running lab tests periodically that measure your estrogen metabolites. Because if you're not, and you start abnormally metabolizing those estrogens, that's where some of the increased risk for disease comes from. The increased risk for cancer when you are not properly metabolizing that hormone that you're taking, whether it be, you know, cream, whether it be pellets, whether it be oral, whether it be patches. If your body's not properly metabolizing it, breaking it down and secreting it or excreting it, then you can end up with higher levels of certain types of estrogens that can increase your risk for the development of certain types of cancers. That's one of the risks. So if you're doing that, you should be in communication with your prescribing doctor to have those levels monitored. That's just, that to me is just diligence and smart. Okay, so this question is a little different. Nancy's asking, or rather Julie's asking, what level should LDL and HDL be, and where do you get healthy organic cholesterol from? Well, you get healthy cholesterol from eating animal meat. A lot of our cholesterol in the diet, about 25% of our total cholesterol is from our diet. The rest of it is intrinsically produced in the liver and other cells. Every cell in your body has the ability to produce cholesterol. So it's not so much that you need to go seeking eating pure organic cholesterol. You're going to get that from eating healthy animal foods predominantly, or you're going to produce cholesterol intrinsically, naturally, even if you're not eating it, because your liver has the ability to metabolize lipids and form cholesterol as a result of that. So you don't necessarily need to go seek it out per se. But understand that the dietary cholesterol, a lot of doctors will tell you, don't eat any cholesterol in your diet. Don't eat eggs. Don't eat foods with cholesterol like meat, because it'll raise your cholesterol and your cholesterol is already high. And what they're telling you is that anything over 200 is considered high. And that's just, again, this is my opinion, and this is the opinion of, I didn't form my opinion just because I have an opinion. Like, this is the opinion of a lot of the world leading experts in cholesterol. And not every doctor agrees on this. I want you to understand, a lot of doctors will tell you, well, the science is done with cholesterol. We know high cholesterol causes heart disease. That's not true. There's a whole other body of science that says that cholesterol is very, very safe and very, very fine, and that lower than 200 is kind of ridiculous, and that people, what we do know is the old number used to be 250. Now, that number was not biased. It was not as influenced by pharmaceutical industry, so that tends to be what a lot of doctors who are like me will shoot for, as long as it's under that, as long as it's that or less. You know, we seem to be pretty good with that. Now, one of the things you have to understand is people with the highest cholesterol live longer. That's a fact. We know that. People with the highest cholesterol have longer lifespans. Now, to me, that's an argument all by itself. We don't know why. We don't know why that happens, but we know it's true. Higher cholesterol, people have a longer lifespan. We know that cholesterol is important for these things. We also know cholesterol is an antibacterial, it's antiviral, so it helps fight infection. And so sometimes what happens, a person goes to the doctor when they feel bad, they get their cholesterol measured, their cholesterol might be running high because they're sick. And so never, ever, ever use your cholesterol marker when you have a viral or a bacterial infection as the reading for basing whether or not you're going to try or attempt to lower your cholesterol. Let's see here. Lots of yeses. We're going to count those yeses and see if we're going to do a genetic show here. If you don't have a gallbladder anymore, there's some things that you can do if you don't have a gallbladder. So like if you've had a surgical removal, one of the things I recommend that you take is nutritional digestive aid. So digestive enzyme support, because without your gallbladder, it's going to be harder potentially to absorb fat. And one of the things we see 5 to 10 years post gallbladder surgery is we start to see fat soluble vitamin deficiencies really turning up a lot more aggressively. So that's vitamin A, D, E, and K, as well as omega-3 fatty acids. So I recommend a product called Ultra Digest GB for support of digestion if you've had your gallbladder removed. And we can put a link up there to that for you. Okay, let's see here. Can weight gain of more than 35 pounds trigger a loss of hormones or periods? Tracy wants to know. Tracy, typically it's just the opposite. Typically it's can weight loss, aggressive weight loss, trigger a loss of period? And the answer there is absolutely yes. When women's body fat gets too low, we see this in Olympians, we see this in high-level athletes, where they lose a lot of weight and their body fat's too low, they'll actually lose their cycle, again, because fat is a very important regulator of hormone levels, but generally not the opposite way around. If you've gained 35 pounds, that could be a hormone disruptor depending on why you've gained the weight. If you've gained inflammatory weight, if that inflammation is largely being caused by dietary and lifestyle factors and some of these other things, yes, that can create a hormone disruption. So, absolutely, that can be part of a problem. Are vitamin B injections effective? If you're talking about IV can be very effective for immediate energy, but injections like in the muscle, they're not really, in my experience, they're not really any more effective than oral vitamin B supplementation. Okay. So this is a good question. How can I lower androstenedione? My testosterone, estrogen, progesterone are in normal range. I also have PCOS. Number one way that you can lower your androstenedione is to get your insulin under control. One of the things that elevations in insulin, PCOS, by the way, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is diabetes of the ovaries. That's the way you want to think about it. Don't think of it any differently. It's diabetes of the ovaries. So generally what tends to happen in that scenario is there's an increase in insulin, and that is going to come back over here in that androstenedione, and it's going to potentially elevate it, or it's going to favorably, let me spell this right for you, androstenedione. It's going to potentially lead to more conversion of your sex steroid into androstenedione. It can also elevate your testosterone and cause facial hair growth, dark hair, those kinds of things. So the best number one thing that you can do is to control your insulin. And the easiest way to do that, there's two really simple pieces of advice I can give you. One is get involved in an exercise program immediately. And it doesn't have to be CrossFit or something super aggressive. It just needs to be where you're moving and you're getting exercise on a daily basis. Number two, you need to make sure that you're monitoring your diet intake. Excessive carbohydrate intake is highly linked to PCOS. So you might consider keeping your total carbohydrates, below 30, 40 grams a day, keeping them lower to get your insulin under better control. Also have, or ask your doctor to do a full nutritional workup, because if your zinc is low, your chromium, your vitamin D, if any of those things are low, it's going to impact and affect your blood sugar levels and cause an increase potentially in insulin, leading to hormonal disruption. Remember, insulin elevations can disrupt estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, androstenedione. It's not a good thing. Too much insulin is a very, very bad thing as it relates to hormones. And the biggest thing that causes too much insulin is excessive sugar, excessive carbohydrates in the diet, and sedentary behavior, sedentary activity, or lack of activity rather. This question coming in, person who's been disabled for osteoarthritis and been on NSAIDs for years. Recommendations for alternative to non-steroidals. You know, one of the best things that you can do is just go to a functional medicine doctor and get a complete workup, because there could be a lot of different things that might have an impact there. One of the things that can impact really aggressively is low levels of omega-3 fatty acids. As a matter of fact, some research studies show that 4 to 6 grams of concentrated omega-3, concentrated EPA and DHA can be equally as effective as ibuprofen. So that may be where you want to start, is just with a strong dose of omega-3. Okay. Can stress throw hormonal balance off? Yeah, it can. Partly because stress causes an increase in insulin, but stress also causes an increase in another hormone called cortisol. And if we're talking about chronic stress, long-term stress elevates cortisol, and an elevation in cortisol leads to a suppression of immune function. It leads to bone loss, it leads to muscle atrophy and weakness, which leads to shortening of muscles, which leads to inability to basically to exercise. And that spirals, it spins, it keeps you in that state. Well, that cortisol also, excessive cortisol like that, will disrupt your brain's capacity to produce different adrenal hormones. So it's going to really, really disrupt, it's going to create a cascade of disruption with your hormones. So yes, to answer your question, chronic stress can very, very much impact your hormone levels. This question coming in about elimination diet versus blood test to check for sensitivity. If you're talking about gluten sensitivity, the only way to do it, the only way to check for it with any great degree of accuracy is genetics. We can put a link up for you to read more about that. If you're talking about other foods, hands down, you should always try an elimination diet if you don't have a doctor you're working with who can run these types of tests. I mean, elimination diet is self-feedback, right? You're cutting certain things out and then bringing them back in and seeing how you feel after you've cut them out and brought them back in. But a problem with elimination diets is they'll help you identify certain things. But if you're still hitting a plateau and you're still struggling in your health, then the right blood test can make a huge difference. A huge difference. If you want to see how big of a difference it can make, go check out, I have a video on our YouTube channel. It should be under Gluten-Free Success Stories, but there's a gentleman there, his name is Greg, and his story is a perfect example where this gentleman went to 60 different dermatologists. Then he went to the ER because he had his colon was perforated as a result of food he was eating that he didn't know was creating those problems. And he had already gone and changed his diet. He had already hit that plateau point. He came to me to get delineation and clarity on what things he should absolutely be avoiding versus not. And so testing can give that clarity for many people. I'm a big believer in testing without guessing. So like test, don't guess. But if you're on your own and you're not working with the doctor, yeah, do an elimination diet first. It's common sense that you want to take away things that your body obviously is giving you symptoms over. So definitely you can do one. But if you're hitting that plateau, get help. Okay. Oh, I like this. Shushi Mushi is asking, Dr. Osborne, a positive ANA test can be caused because of gluten sensitivity, or do I have to check other possibilities? My doctor couldn't detect the problem. Go back to genetic testing for gluten sensitivity. Yes, gluten sensitivity can cause positive ANA. That's ANA is anti-nuclear antibodies. It's a test that a lot of rheumatologists and other doctors will run to try to detect to see whether or not you have autoimmune disease. Okay. I think we got that one answered already. We answered it for somebody else already. So, okay, another one. Can heavy metal toxicity affect your hormones? Of course it can. Here's one way in which heavy metal toxicity can impact hormones. Remember I said earlier that magnesium is critical for the proper metabolism of estrogen. Well, let's use, for example, lead toxicity. The reason I use lead is because it's probably one of the most common heavy metal toxicities today in people above the age of 45. And one of the reasons why, if you're above 40, if you're 45 or older, you grew up in what we call the lead age. You were young enough to remember leaded gasoline. There was lead in the gasoline. There was lead in paint. There was lead in children's toys. Many of the pipes were soldered with lead. So lead was very, very prevalent in our environments. And so many of you have accumulated lead from that age on, and you bioaccumulated it. Well, lead displaces magnesium and calcium. So lead interferes with magnesium and calcium. And both of these are important for hormone regulation. Magnesium for the actual metabolism of different hormones, but calcium does a different job as it relates to hormones. Let's see if we got enough room to draw here. We'll find a place. So if this is your cell, and this is the cell nucleus, and this is the DNA inside the cell. And this, on the surface of the cell, is a hormone receptor. So this is where your hormone will attach. And so here's the way this kind of works, generically speaking. That hormone comes in here, whether it's estrogen, progesterone, whatever that hormone is. It comes in here, it attaches to the hormone receptor, and it sends a message through the cell so that that message is supposed to get to your DNA, and it's supposed to turn on certain genes to do certain things, okay? Depending on the hormone, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. Well, calcium sits inside your cells to deliver that message. Calcium is like a messenger boy of hormones. There's actually a name for this in science. It's called a secondary messenger, meaning that calcium receives the message of the hormone and then delivers that message to the DNA, and then the DNA turns on certain genes because that's what the hormone is asking it to do. So calcium plays a role as a regulatory electrolyte in the delivery of the message of that hormone to your genes so that it can be activated. And if you have a lead toxicity, remember that lead displaces calcium. It competes with calcium. And wherever calcium goes, wherever calcium plays, lead can compete with those functions, and this is one of those functions it can compete with. So yes, heavy metal toxicity can definitely affect hormones. Okay, we're right up at the hour here, and there's no way I can answer all these questions. So what we'll do, if you've got a topic idea and you'd really, really love to hear me talk about that topic idea, we're open to that. We really want to help serve you. We want to do our best to get your questions answered. Please do me a favor. Send those topic ideas over. You can post it in the feed, but if you send it over to glutenology@gmail.com, it's glutenology@gmail.com, then we will classify those, and we'll see what our demands are and what most of you are wanting, and we'll start brainstorming those shows for you and create that. So if you've got show ideas that you'd like to see me cover, just send me an email, and we'll do our best to get those covered shortly. Remember that we want you to share this information with somebody who you think it might be helpful for. That's part of our goal, is to save 100 million. You could hashtag save 100 million lives, and that would be great. But we want you to share this information. If you haven't already, go over to glutenfreesociety.org and sign up for our gluten-free survival kit. If you haven't already read No Grain, No Pain, make sure you get your copy. It's our nutrition guide for the show. So those of you who haven't read it, that are on the show, and your question marks are popping into your head when I'm talking about true gluten-free versus traditional gluten-free and other terms that you're going to hear me use, that book is really your guideline to a safety net for your diet. So make sure you get your copy. We will be back next Monday night, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Love for you to join us again. Look for your email. If you don't subscribe, that's how we hit reminders. Also, you can hit that bell down there on the bottom of the screen, and you'll get a reminder from us. So make sure you do that if you want to tune in on a weekly basis. Until next week, hope you have a fantastic Tuesday through Sunday, and we will see you for Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain next Monday night. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.